Hi there, I'm Ira, and today I'm going to read a book called A New Earth from Eckhart Tolle. So I'm just gonna focusing on highlights from this book, and which is quite many, but I will try to read as fast as I can. So first highlight. It is important to recognize here the story and the thought forms that make us the story, whether people agree with it or not, have absolutely nothing to do with who you are. Even if people agree with it, it is ultimately a fiction. Many people don't realize until they are on their deathbed and everything external falls away that nothing ever had anything to do with who they are. In the proximity of death, the whole concept of ownership stands revealed as ultimately meaningless. In the last moment of their life, they then also realized that while they were looking throughout their lives for a more complete sense of self, what they were really looking for, their being had actually always already been there, but had been largely obscured by their identification with things, which ultimately means identification with their mind. Blessed are the poor in spirit, Jesus says, for there will be the kingdom of heaven. What does poor in spirit mean? No inner baggage, no identifications, not with things, not with any mental concept, but they have a sense of self in them. And what is the kingdom of heaven? The simple but profound joy of being that is there when you let go of identification and so become poor in spirit. This is why renouncing all possession had been an ancient spiritual practice in both the East and West. Renunciation of possession, however, will not automatically free you of the ego. It will attempt to ensure its survival by finding something else to identify with, for example, a mental image of yourself as someone who has transcended all interest in material possession and is therefore superior, is more spiritual than others. So the next highlight I highlighted here. Resistance is an inner contraction, a hardening of the shell of the ego. You are closed. Whatever action you take in a state of inner resistance, which we could also call negativity, it will create more outer resistance and the universe will not be on your side. Life will not be helpful. If the shutters are closed, the sunlight cannot come in. When you yield internally, when you surrender, a new dimension of consciousness opens up. If action is possible or necessary, your action will be in alignment with the whole and supported by creative intelligence, the unconditioned consciousness which in a state of inner openness you become one with. Circumstances and people then become helpful, cooperative, coincidence happen. If no action is possible, you rest in the peace and inner stillness that comes with surrender. You rest in God. Sorry. So that is the second highlight. Third highlights. Okay. By not reacting to the ego, you will often be able to bring out the sanity in others, which is the unconditioned consciousness as opposed to the conditioned. At times you may have to take practical steps to protect yourself from deeply unconscious people. This you can do without making them into enemies. Your greatest protection, however, is being conscious. Somebody becomes an enemy if you personalize the unconsciousness that is the ego. Non-reaction is not weakness but strength. Another word for non-reaction is forgiveness. To forgive is to overlook, or rather to look through. You look through the ego to the sanity that is in every human being as his or her essence. The ego loves to complain and feel resentful, not only about other people, but also to do a situation, make it into an enemy. I don't want to be here, I don't want to be doing this, I'm being treated unfairly, and the ego greatest enemy of all is of course the present moment, which is to say life itself. Complaining is not to be confused with informing someone of a mistake or deficiency so that it can be put right. And to refrain from complaining doesn't necessarily mean putting up with the bad quality or behavior. There is no ego in telling the waiter that your soup is cold and needs to be heated up. If you stick to the facts, which are always neutral, how dare you serve me a cold soup? that's complaining. There is a me that loves to feel personally offended by the cold soup and is going to make the most a me that enjoys making someone wrong. So next highlights is it requires honesty to see whether you still harbor grievance, whether there is someone in your life you have not completely forgiven, an enemy. If you do become aware of the grievance, both on the level of thought as well as emotion, that is to say, be aware of the thoughts that keep it alive and feel the emotion as the body responds to those thoughts, and don't try to let go of the grievance. Trying to let go, to forgive, does not work. And forgiveness happens naturally when you see that it has no purpose other than strengthen a full sense of self, to keep the ego in place. And the saying is freeing, and Jesus' teaching to forgive your enemies is essential about undoing of one of the main egoic structures in human mind. The past has no power to stop you from being present now, and only your grievance about the past can do that. And what is a grievance? It is the baggage of all thoughts and emotion. So, being right, making wrong. Complaining as well as fault finding and in reactivity strengthen the ego's sense of boundary and separateness on which its survival depends, but they also strengthen the ego in other way by giving it a feeling of superiority on which it thrives. It may not be immediately apparent how complaining, say, about a traffic jam, about politicians, about the greedy wealthy or the lazy unemployed, or your colleagues or ex-boss, man or woman, can give you a sense of superiority. Here is why. When you complain, by implication you are right and the person or situation you complain about or react against is wrong. Okay, let's go to another highlight. So, if you believe only your religion is the truth, you are using it in the service of the ego. Used in such a way, religion becomes ideology and create as illusory sense of superiority as well as division and conflict between people. In the service of the truth, religious teachings represent signposts or maps left behind by awakened humans to assist you in spiritual awakening, that is to say, in becoming free of identification with form. There is only one absolute truth, and all other truths emanate from it. When you find that truth, your actions will be in alignment with it. And human action can reflect the truth, or it can reflect illusions. Can the truth be put into words? Yes, but the words are, of course, not it. They only point to it. The truth is inseparable from where? From who you are. Yes, you are the truth. If you look for it elsewhere, you will be deceived every time. The very being that you are is truth. And Jesus tried to convey that when he said, I am the way and the truth and the life. These words uttered by Jesus are one of the most powerful and direct pointers to the truth, if understood correctly. If misinterpreted, however, they become a great obstacle. And you speak of the innermost of I am, the essence, identity of every man and woman, every life form, in fact. He speaks of the life that you are, and some Christian mystics have called it in the Christ within. Buddhism call it your Buddha nature, in your Buddhist nature, and for Hindu it's Atman, and in the dwelling God. When you are in touch with that dimension within yourself and being in touch with it is your natural state, not some miraculous achievement, all your actions and relationship will reflect the oneness with all life that you sense deep within. This is love. Laws, commandments, rules, and regulations are necessary for those who are cut off from who they are, the truth within. They prevent the worst excess of the ego, and often they don't even do that. Love and do what you will. Say St. Augustine, words cannot get much closer to the truth than that. So the ego is not personal. On a collective level, the mindset we are right and they are wrong is particularly deeply entrenched in those parts of the world where conflicts between two nations, race, tribes, religions, or ideologies is long-standing, extreme, and endemic, and both sides of the conflict are equally identified with their own perspective, their own story, that is to say, identify with thoughts. Both are equally incapable of seeing that another perspective, another story may exist and also be valid. So Israeli writer Y. Haveli speaks of the possibility of accommodating a competing narrative, but in many parts of the world, people are not yet able or willing to do that. Both sides believe themselves to be in possession of the truth. Both regard themselves as the victims and the other as evil, and because they have conceptualized and thereby dehumanized the other as an enemy, they can kill and inflict all kinds of violence on the other, even on children, without feeling their humanity and suffering, and they become trapped in an insane spiral of perpetration and retribution, action and reaction. Here it becomes obvious that human ego is in collective aspect as us against them is even more insane than me, the individual ego, although the mechanism is the same. By far the greater part of violence that humans have inflicted on each other is not the work of criminals or the mentally deranged, but of normal respectable citizens in the service of the collective ego. And one can go so far as to say that on this planet, normal equal insane. What is it that lies on the root of this insanity? Complete identification with thoughts and emotion, that is to say, ego. Next highlight is, alright, so the ego always wants something from other people or a situation. There is always a hidden agenda, always a sense of not enough yet, of insufficiency, and that needs to be filled. It uses people and situations to get what it wants, and even when it succeeds, it is never satisfied for long. Often it's thwarted in its aim, and for the most part of the gap between I want and what is becomes a constant source of upset and anguish. The famous and now classic pop song, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, is a song of the ego. The underlying emotion that governs all the activity of the ego is fear. So the fear of being nobody, the fear of non-existent, the fear of death, all its activities that are ultimately designed to eliminate this fear. But the most the ego can ever do is to cover up temporarily with an intimate relationship, a new possession, or winning at this or that. Illusion will never satisfy you. Only the truth of who you are, if realized, will set you free. And why fear? Because the ego arises by identification with form, and deep down it knows that no forms are permanent, and that they are all fleeting, so there is always a sense of insecurity around the ego, even if on the outside it appears confident. As I was walking with a friend through a beautiful nature reserve near Malibu in California, we came upon the ruin of what had been once a country house destroyed by a fire several decades ago. Okay, I guess that's stop. So next highlight, let's see. In fact, he spoke of grotesque contradiction between what people consider to be my achievement and the reality of who I am and what I am capable of. So this is why it is hard for a famous person to be in genuine relationship with others. A genuine relationship is one that is not dominated by the ego with its image making and self-seeking. In a genuine relationship, there is an outward flow of open, alert attention toward the other person, in which there is no wanting whatsoever. The alert attention is present. It is a prerequisite for any authentic relationship. The ego always either wants something, or if it believes there is nothing to get from the other, it is in a state of utter indifference. It doesn't care about you, and so the three predominant states of egoic relationships are wanting, thwarted, wanting, that include anger, resentment, blaming, and complaining, and indifference. Next highlight. I usually congratulate people when they tell me I don't know who I am anymore. Then they look perplexed and ask, are you saying it is a good thing to be confused? I ask them to investigate. What does it mean to be confused? I don't know, it's not confusion. Confusion is I don't know, but I should know. Or I don't know, but I need to know. Is it possible to let go of the belief that you should or need to know who you are? In other words, can you cease looking to conceptual definitions to give you a sense of self? Can you cease looking to a thought for an identity? When you let go of the belief that you should or need to know who you are, what happens to confusion? Suddenly, it is gone. When you fully accept that you don't know, you actually enter a state of peace and clarity that is closer to who you truly are than a thought could ever be. Defining yourself through thought is limiting yourselves. Pre-established roles. Of course, different people fulfill different functions in this world. It cannot be otherwise as far as intellectual or physical abilities are concerned. Knowledge, skills, talents, and energy levels, human beings differ widely. What really matters is not what function you fulfill in this world, but whether you identify with your function to such an extent that it takes you over and becomes a role that you play. When you play roles, you are unconscious. When you catch yourself playing a role, that recognition creates a space between you and the role. It is the beginning of freedom from the role. When you are completely identified with the role, you confuse a pattern of behavior with who you are and you take yourself very seriously. You also automatically assign roles to others that correspond to yours. For example, when you visit doctors who are totally identified with their roles, then you will not be a human being, but a patient or a case history. So although the social structures in the contemporary world are less rigid than in ancient cultures, there are still many pre-established functions or roles that people readily identify with and which thus become part of the ego. And this causes human interaction to become inauthentic, dehumanized, alienating. And those pre-established roles may give you a somewhat comforting sense of identity, but ultimately you lose yourself in them. The function people have in hierarchical organization, such as the military, the church, the government institution, or large corporation, easily lend themselves to becoming role identities. Authentic human interactions become impossible when you lose yourself in a role. So, let's go to next. Happiness is a role versus the true happiness. So how are you just great? Couldn't be better, true or false? In many cases, happiness is a role people play, and behind this smiling facade, there is a great deal of pain. Depression, breakdowns, and overreaction are common when unhappiness is covered up behind a smiling exterior and brilliant white teeth, when there is denial, sometimes even to oneself, that there is much unhappiness. Just fine is a role that ego plays more commonly in America than in certain other countries, where being and looking miserable is almost a norm and therefore more socially acceptable. It is probably an exaggeration, but I am told that in the capital of one Nordic country, you run the risk of being arrested for drunken behavior if you smile at the strangers in the street. If there is unhappiness in you, first you need to acknowledge that it is there. But don't say, I'm unhappy. Unhappiness has nothing to do with who you are. Say, there is unhappiness in me, then investigate it. The situation you find yourself in may have something to do with it. So I'm gonna use a different device because the battery is dying from another phone. So here we go, the next highlight. Action may be required to change situation or remove yourself from it. If there is nothing you can do, face what is and say, well, right now there is how it is. I can either accept it or make myself miserable. So the primary cause of unhappiness is never the situation but your thoughts about it. And be aware of the thoughts you are thinking and separate them from the situation, which is always neutral, which always it is that it is. There is a situation or the fact, and here are my thoughts about it. Instead of making up stories, stay with the facts. For example, I am ruined in the story. It limits you and prevent you from taking effective action. I have 50 cents left in my bank account. It is a fact. Facing fact is always empowering. And be aware that what you think is to a large extent creates the emotions that you feel. and see the link between your thinking and your emotions, rather than being your thoughts and emotions, be the awareness behind them. And don't seek happiness. If you seek it, you won't find it, because seeking is the antithesis of happiness. And happiness is ever elusive, but freedom from unhappiness is attainable now, by facing what is rather than making up stories about it. Unhappiness covers up your natural state of well-being and inner peace and source of true happiness. Parenthood role or function titles. So many adults play roles when they speak to young children. They use silly words and sound, they talk down to the child, they don't treat the child as an equal, and the fact that you temporarily know more or that you are bigger does not mean the child is not your equal. The majority of adults at some point in their lives find themselves being a parent, one of the most universal roles. The all-important question is, are you able to fulfill the function of being a parent and fulfill it well without identifying with that function that is without it becoming a role? Part of the necessary function of being a parent is looking after the needs of the child, preventing the child what to do and not to do when being a parent is becoming an identity. However, when your sense of self is entirely or largely derived from it, the function easily becomes overemphasized, exaggerated, and takes you over. And giving children what they need becomes excessive and turns into spoiling. Preventing them from getting into danger becomes overprotectiveness and interferes with their needs to explore the world and try things out for themselves. And telling children what to do or not to do becomes controlling, overbearing. And what is more, the role-playing entity remains in place long after the need for those particular functions has passed. Body in the eyes of the world, so that I too can be somebody through you. Don't disappoint me, I sacrifice so much for you. My disapproval of you is intended to make you feel so guilty and uncomfortable that you finally conform to my wishes. And it goes without saying that I know what's best for you, and I love you, and I will continue to love you if you do what I know is right for you. So when you make such unconscious motivations conscious, you immediately see how absurd they are, and the ego that lies behind them, and become visible, as does its function. And some parents that I spoke to suddenly realized, my God, is this what I have been doing? And once you see what you are doing or have been doing, you also see its futility and that unconscious pattern that comes to an end by itself. Awareness is the greatest agent for change. So if your parents are doing this to you, do not tell them they are unconscious and in the grip of the ego. That will likely make them even more unconscious, because the ego will take up a defense position. It is enough for you to recognize that it is the ego in them, that it's not who they are, egoic patterns, even long-standing one. And sometimes it's almost miraculously when you don't oppose internally. Opposition only gives them a renewed strength that even if they don't, you can accept them, parent behavior with compassion, without needing to react, and that is to say, without personalizing it. Be aware also of your own unconscious assumptions or expectations that lie behind your old habitual reactions to them. And my parents should approve what I do. They should understand me and accept me for who I am. Really, who should they? The fact is that they don't, because they can't. And their evolving consciousness hasn't made the quantum leap to the level of awareness yet. They are not yet able to disidentify from their role. Yes, but I can't feel happy and comfortable with who I am unless I have their approval and understanding, really. What difference does their approval or disapproval truly make to who you are? And all such an examined assumption causes a great deal of negative emotion, much unnecessary unhappiness. Be alert are some of the thoughts that go through your mind, and internalize the voice of your father or mother saying perhaps something like, you're not good enough, you will never amount to anything, or some other judgment or mental position. If there is awareness in you, you will be able to recognize the voice in your head for what it is, and all thoughts conditioned by the past. If there is awareness in you, You no longer need to believe in every thought you think is an all thoughts and no more. Awareness means presence, and only presence can dissolve the unconscious past in you. So if you think you are so enlightened, Ramdas said, go and speak. Spend a week with your parent. That is a good advice. And the relationship with your is not only the primordial relationship that set the tone of all subsequent relationship, it is also a good test for your degree of presence. And the more shared past there is a relationship, the more present you need to be. And otherwise you'll be forced to relive the past again and again. Conscious suffering. So if you have young children, give them help, guidance and protection to the best of your ability. But even more important, give them space to be. So they come into this world through you, but they are not yours. To believe I know what's best for you may be true when they are very young, but the older they get, the less true it becomes. The more expectation you have of how their life should unfold, the more you are in your mind instead of being present for them. So eventually, they will make mistakes and they will experience some form of suffering, as all humans do. In fact, they may be mistakes only from your perspective. And what to you is a mistake may be exactly what your children need to do or experience, and give them as much help and guidance as you can. But realize that you may also at times have to allow them to make mistakes, especially as they begin to reach adulthood. At times you may also have to allow them to suffer, and suffering may come to them out of the blue, or it may come as the consequence of their own mistakes. Next highlight. Alright, recognizing your child. So you are a human being. What does that mean? Mastery of life is not a question of control, but of finding a balance between human and being. Mother, father, husband, wife, young, old, roles you play, the function you fulfill, whatever you do, all that belongs to the human dimension. It has its place and needs to be honored, but in itself it is not enough for a fulfilled, truly meaningful relationship or life. Human alone is never enough, no matter how hard you try or what you achieve. Then there is being. It is found in the still, alert presence of consciousness itself. And the consciousness that you are human is form. Being is formless. Human and being are not separate but interwoven. In the human dimension, you are unquestionably superior to your child. You are bigger, stronger, know more, can do more. So if that dimension is all you know, you will feel superior to your child, if only unconsciously. And you will make your child feel inferior. So if only unconsciously, there is no equality between you and your child, because there is only form in your relationship, and in form you are of course not equal. You may love your child, but your love will be human only, and that is to say, conditional, possessive, intermittent. And only beyond form in being are you equal, and only when you find the formless dimension in yourself can there be true love in that relationship, and the presence that you are. Timeless I am, recognize itself in another and the other, and the child in this case feels love, that is to say, recognize. To love is to recognize yourself in another, and the otherness stands revealed as an illusion pertaining to the purely human realm, the realm of form, and the longing for love that is in every child's longing to be recognized, not on the level of form, but on the level of being. Next. You become most powerful in whatever you do if the action is performed for its own sake rather than as means to protect, enhance, or confirm to your role identity. Every role is a fictitious sense of self, and through it everything becomes personalized and thus corrupted and distorted by the mind made little me in whatever role it happens to be playing. Most of the people who are in position of power in this world, such as politicians, TV personalities, business, as well as religious leaders, are completely identified with their role, with a few notably exceptions. They may be considered VIPs, but they are no more than unconscious player in the egoic game. A game that looks so important yet is ultimately devoid of a true purpose. It is, in the words of Shakespeare, a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Amazingly, Shakespeare arrived at this conclusion without having the benefit of television. And if the echoic earth drama has any purpose at all, it is an indirect one. It creates more and more suffering on the planet, and suffering, although largely ego created, is in an ego self-destructive. It is the fire in which the ego burns itself up. In a world of role-playing personality, there's few people who don't project a mind-made image, and there are some even on TV, in the media, and the business world, but function from the deeper core of their being. Those who do not attempt to appear more than they are, but are simply themselves, stand out as remarkably in awe. The only ones who truly makes a difference in this world. They are the bringers on a new consciousness. Whatever they do becomes empowered because it is in alignment with the purpose of the whole. Their influence, however, goes far beyond what they do, far beyond their function. Their mere presence, simple, natural, unassuming, has a transformational effect on whoever they come into contact with. So when you don't play a role, it means there is no self in what you do. There is no secondary agenda, protection, or strengthening of yourself. So as a result, your actions have far greater power. You are totally focused on the situation. You become one with it. You don't try to be anybody in particular. You are most powerful, most effective when you are completely yourself, but don't try to be yourself. And as another word, it's called natural, spontaneous me. As soon as you are trying to be this or that, you are playing a role. Just be yourself is a good advice. But it can also be a misleading. The mind will come in and say, let's see, how can I be myself? Then the mind will develop some kind of strategy, how to be myself, another role, how can I be myself? It is in effect the wrong question. It implies you have to do something to be yourself, but how doesn't apply here because you are yourself already. And just stop adding unnecessary baggage to who you already are. But I don't know who I am, I don't know what it means to be myself. If you can be absolutely comfortable with not knowing who you are, then what self is who you are. The being behind the human, a field of pure potentially rather than something that is already defined. So give up defining yourself to yourself or to others. You won't die, you will come to life, and don't be concerned with how others define you. And when they define you, they are limiting themselves, so it's their problem. So whenever you interact with people, don't be there primarily as a function or role, but as a field of consciousness presence. What does the ego play roles? Because of one unexamined assumption, one fundamental error, one unconscious thought. That thought is, I am not enough. Other unconscious thoughts follow, I need to play a role in order to get what I need to be fully myself. I need to get more so that I can be more. But you cannot be more than you are, because underneath your physical and psychological form, you are one with life itself, one with being. In form you are and will always be inferior to some, superior to others. In essence, you are neither inferior nor superior to anyone, and true self-esteem and true humility arise out of the realization. In the eyes of the ego, self-esteem and humility are contradictory. In truth, they are one and the same. So the pathological ego, in a wider sense of the word, the ego itself is pathological no matter what form it takes. When we look at the ancient Greek root of the word pathological, we discover just how appropriate that term is when applied to the ego. Although the word is normally used to describe the condition of disease, it is derived from pathos, which means suffering. This is, of course, exactly what the Buddha already discovered 2,600 years ago, is a characteristic of the human condition. So a person in the grip of ego, however, does not recognize suffering as suffering, but will look upon it as the only appropriate response in any given situation. The ego, in its blindness, is incapable of seeing the suffering it inflicts on itself and others. Unhappiness is an ego created mental emotional disease that has reached epidemic proportion. It is the inner equivalent of the environmental pollution of our planet. And negative states such as anger, anxiety, hatred, resentment, discontent, envy, jealousy, and so on are not recognized as negative, but that's totally justified and are the further misperceived not as self-created, but as caused by someone else or some external factor. I am holding responsible for my pain, and this is what my implication of the ego is saying. So the ego cannot distinguish between a situation as an interpretation of and a reaction to that situation. You might say, what a dreadful day, without realizing that the cold, the wind, and the rain, or whatever condition you react to are not dreadful. They are as they are, and what is dreadful is your reaction and your inner resistance to it, and the emotion that is created by that resistance. So in Shakespeare's word, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So next. Another soft person don't even know that you are doing it, don't know what you're creating. However, to create suffering without recognizing it, this is the essence of unconscious living. To create suffering without recognizing it. This is being totally in the grip of the ego. The extent of the ego inability to recognize itself and see what it is doing is staggering and unbelievable. It will do exactly what it condemns others for and not see it. When it is pointed out, it will use angry denial, clever agreements, and selfish justification to distort the facts. People do it, corporations do it, governments do it. So when all else fails, the ego will resort to shouting or even to physical violence. Sent in the Marines, we can now understand the deep wisdom in Jesus' words of the cross. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. To end the mystery that has afflicted the human conditions, for thousands of years you have stuck with yourselves and take responsibility for your inner state at any given moment. That means now as yourself, is there negativity in me at this moment? Then become alert, attentive to your thoughts as well as your emotions. Watch out for the low-level unhappiness in whatever form that I mentioned earlier, such as discontent, nervousness, being fed up, and so on. And watch out for the thoughts that appear to justify or explain this unhappiness, but in reality cause it. The moment you become aware of negative state in yourself, it does not mean you have failed, it means that you have succeeded. Under that awareness happen, there is identification with inner states, and such identification is ego. With awareness comes this identification from thoughts, emotion, and reaction. This is not to be confused with denial. The thoughts, emotion, and reaction are recognized, and in the moment of recognizing, this identification happens automatically. Your sense of self, of who you are, then undergoes a shift because you were the thoughts, emotion, and reactions. Now you are the awareness, the conscious present, the witness of states. One day I will be free from the ego. Who is talking? The ego. To become free of the ego is not really a big job, but a very small one. So all you need to do is to be aware of your thoughts and emotions as they happen. And it's not really a doing, but an alert seeing in that sense. It is true, there is nothing you can do to become free of the ego. So when that shifts happen, which is the shift from thinking to awareness, and intelligence far greater than ego, cleverness begins to operate in your life. Emotions and even thoughts become depersonalized through awareness. Their impersonal nature is recognized. There is no longer a self in them. They are just human emotions, human thoughts, and your entire personal history, which is ultimately no more than a story. So a bundle of thoughts and emotion become of a secondary importance and no longer occupies the front of your consciousness. It no longer forms the basis for your sense of identity. Thank you. So, there is still some more. Sorry, guys. Okay. The voice in the head tells a story that the body believes in and reacts to. So those reactions are emotions. The emotions in turn feed energy back to the thoughts that created the emotion in the first place. This is the vicious circle between unexamined thoughts and emotion, giving rise to emotional thinking and emotional story making. So the emotional component of ego differs from person to person. So in some egos, it is greater than in others. Thoughts that triggers emotional response in the body may sometimes come so fast that before the mind has had time to voice them, the body has already responded with an emotion, and the emotion has turned into reaction. So those thoughts exist at provable stage and could be called unspoken unconscious assumption. They have their origin in a person past condition, usually from early childhood. People cannot be trusted would be an examples of such as unconscious assumption in a person whose primordial relationship, that is to say, with parents or siblings, were not supportive and did not inspire trust. In here, a few more common unconscious assumptions, and nobody respects and appreciates me, so I need to fight to survive. There is never enough money, and life always lets you down. I don't deserve abundance. I don't deserve love. Unconscious assumption creates emotion in the body, which is in turn generate mind activity, and all instant reaction in this way they create your personal reality. All right. After the flutterings, they float on peacefully as if nothing had ever happened. So, if the duck had a human mind, it would keep the fire alive by thinking, by story making. So, this would probably be the duck stories. I don't believe what he just did. He came to within 5 inches of me. He thinks he owns this pond. So he has no consideration for my private space. I'll never trust him again. So next time he'll try something else just to annoy me. I'm sure he's plotting something already, but I'm not going to stand for this. So I'll teach him a lesson he won't forget. And on the mind spins still thinking and talking about days, months, years later. And so as far as the body is concerned, the fight is still continuing, and the energy it generates in response to all the thoughts is emotion, which in turn generate more thinking. And this becomes the emotional thinking of the ego. You can see how problematic the dark side would become if it had a human mind, but this is how most humans live all the time. So no situation or event is ever really finished, and the mind made me and my story keep it going. So we are species that had lost its ways. Everything is natural. Every flower or tree, every animal have important lesson to teach us if we would only stop, look and listen. Our dark lesson is this: flap your wing, which translates as let go of the story and return to the only place of power, the present moment. Thanks. So, at the lower end of the scale and positive thoughts at the higher, the vibrational frequency of the pain body resonates with that of negative thoughts, which is why only those thoughts can fit the pain body. So the usual pattern of thought creating emotion is reversed in the case of the pain body. That is, initially emotion from the pain body quickly gains control of your thinking, and once your mind has been taken over by the pain body, your thinking becomes negative. And the voice in your head will be telling sad, anxious, or angry stories about yourself, of your life, about other people, about past, future, imaginary events, and the voice will be blaming, accusing, complaining, imagining. And you are totally identified with whatever your voice says, believe all its distorted thoughts. At the point the addiction to unhappiness has set in. It is not so much that you cannot stop the train of negative thoughts, but that you don't want to. And this is because the pain body at the time is living through you, pretending to be you. And the pain body, pain is pleasure, it eagerly devours every negative thoughts. In fact, the usual voice in your head has now become the voice of the pain body. It has taken over the internal dialogue. A vicious circle becomes established between the pain body and your thinking. Every thought feeds the pain body, and in turn the pain body generates more thoughts. And at some point, after a few hours or even, it has replenished itself and returns to its dormant stage, leaving behind a depleted organism and a body that is much more susceptible to illness. Next. There is only one perpetrator of evil on the planet: human unconsciousness. That realization in through forgiveness, and with forgiveness, your victim identity dissolves and your true power emerges, the power of present. Instead of blaming the darkness, you bring in the light. Next. Okay. And the great distress, they went to see Hakuin to apologize and ask for forgiveness. We are really sorry, we have come to take the baby back. Our daughter confessed that you are not the father. Is that so? Is all that was said as they handed the baby over to them. The master responded to false attentives bad news and good news in exactly the same way he said so. He allows the form of the moment, good or bad, to be as it is, and so does not become a participant in human drama. To him, there is only this moment, and this moment is as it is. Events are not personalized. He is nobody's victim. He is completely at one with what happens. Then what happens has no power over him anymore. Only if you resist what happens are you at the mercy of what happens, and the world will determine your happiness and unhappiness. The baby is looked after with loving care, but turned into good through the power of non-resistance, always responding to what the present moment requires. He lets go of the baby when it's time to do so. Imagine briefly how the ego would have reacted during the various stages of the unfolding of those events. So the stronger the ego, the more time takes over your life. Almost every thought you think is then concerned with the past or future. And your sense of self depends on the past for your identity and on the future for its fulfillment. Fear, anxiety, expectation, regret, guilt, anger are the dysfunction of the time-bound state of consciousness. So there are three ways in which the ego will treat the present moment: as a means to an end, as an obstacle, or as an enemy. And let us look at them in turn so that when this present operates in you, you can recognize it and decide again. To the ego, the present moment is at best only useful as a means to an end. So it gets into some future moment that is considered more important, even though the future never comes except as the present moment and is therefore never more than a talk in your head. In other words, you'll never fully hear because you are always busy trying to get elsewhere. So when this pattern becomes more pronounced, and this is very common, the present moment is regarded and treated as if it were an obstacle to be overcome. This is where impatience, frustration, and stress arise. And in our culture, it is many people's everyday reality, their normal state. Life which is now seen as a problem, and you come to inhabit a world of problems that all need to be solved before you can be happy and fulfill or really start living, or so you think. The problem is, for every problem that is solved, another one pops up. As long as the present moment is seen as an obstacle, there can be no end to our problems. I'll be whatever you want me to be, say life or the now. I'll treat you the way you treat me if you see me as a problem. So I'll be a problem to you if you treat me as an obstacle. I will be an obstacle. Next. So, then there is a vertical dimension of death accessible to you only through the portal of the present moment. So instead of adding time to yourself, removing time, the elimination of time from your consciousness is the elimination of ego. It is the, It is the only true spiritual practice. When we speak of the elimination of time, we are of course not referring to clock time, which is the use of time for practical purpose, such as making an appointment or planning a trip. It would be almost impossible to function in this world without clock time, and what we are speaking is the elimination of a psychological time, which is the egoic mind and the preoccupation with the past and future, and its unwillingness to be one with life by living in alignment with the inevitable isness of the present moment. So when a habitual no to life turns into a yes, whenever you allow this moment to be as it dissolves time as well as the ego. For the ego to survive, it must make time, past and future, more important than the present moment. And the ego cannot tolerate become friendly with the present moment, except briefly just after it got what it wanted, but nothing can satisfy the ego for long, as long as it runs your life. So there are two ways of being unhappy. Not getting what you want is one, and getting what you want is the other. Whatever it is happening is a form of now takes. So it's resist internally. From that is to say the world is an impenetrable barrier that separates you from who you are. Beyond form separates you from the formless one life that you are. So, the joy of being. Unhappiness or negativity is a disease on our planet, and what pollution is on the outer level is negativity on the inner. It is everywhere, not just in places where people don't have enough, but even more so where they have more than enough. Is that surprising? No. The affluent world is even more deeply identified with form, more lost in content, more trapped in ego, and people believe themselves to be dependent on what happens for their happiness. That is to say, dependent on form. They don't realize that what happens is the most unstable thing in the universe. It changes constantly. They look upon the present moment as either marred by something that has happened and shouldn't have, or as deficient because of something that has not happened but should have. And so they miss the deeper perfection that is inherent in life itself. A perfection is always already here that lies beyond what is happening or not happening, which is beyond form. So those that are most extreme in their dysfunctions are physical violence and self-delusions in the form of grandiose fantasies. So a powerful spiritual practice is consciousness to allow the diminish of ego when it happens without attempting to restore it. I recommend that you experiment with this from time to time. For example, when someone criticizes you, blames you, calls you names, instead of immediately retaliating or defending yourself, do nothing. Allow a self-image to remain diminished and become alert to what the self-like deep inside. For a few seconds, it may feel uncomfortable as you've had shrunk in size. Then you may sense an inner spaciousness that feels intensely alive. You haven't been diminished at all. In fact, you have expanded. You may then come to an amazing realization when you are seemingly diminished in some ways and remain in absolute non-reaction, not just externally but also internally. You realize nothing real has been diminished, that through becoming less, you're becoming more. When you no longer defend or attempt to strengthen the form of yourself, you step out of identification with form with mental self-image through becoming less. You in fact undergo an expansion and make room for being to come forward. And through power, who you are become form can then shine through the apparently weakened form. And this is what Jesus means when he says, deny yourself, turn to the other cheek. So many. Okay, the vital hidden half is missing from your lives. The identification of form keeps it trapped in ego. So what you see here, feel, touch, or think about is only one half of reality, so to speak. It is form, is in the teaching of Jesus. It's simply called the world. In the other dimensions, in the kingdom of heaven, or eternal life. So just as space enables all things to exist, and just as without silence, there could be no sound. You will not exist without the vital formless dimension that is the essence of who you are. We could say God if the word has not been so misused. I prefer to call it being. Being is prior to existence. Existence is form, content, what happens. Existence is the foreground of life. Being is the background, as it were. So the collective disease of humanity is that people are so engrossed in what happens, so hypnotized by the world of fluctuating forms, so absorbed in the content of their lives, they have forgotten the essence, that which is beyond content, beyond form, beyond thoughts. They are so consumed by time that they have forgotten eternity, which is their origin, their home, their destiny, and eternity is the living reality of who you are. Some years ago when I was in China. Okay, I'm not going to read that. Next. In finding of the impermanence of all forms, by implication that they are also pointing to the eternal. So only the eternal in you can recognize the impermanent as impermanent. When the dimension of space is lost or rather not known, the things of the world assume an absolute importance, a seriousness and heaviness that in truth they do not have. So when the world is not viewed from the perspective of the formless, it becomes a threatening place and ultimately a place of despair. The Old Testament prophet must have felt this way when he wrote, all things are full of weariness, a man cannot utter it. So object consciousness and space consciousness, most people's lives are cluttered up with things, material things, things to do, things to think about. Their lives are like the history of humanity, which Winston Churchill defined as one damn thing after another. And their minds are filled up with the clutter of thoughts and one thought after another. This is the dimension of object consciousness as many people predominant reality, and that is why their lives are so out of balance. So object consciousness needs to be balanced by space consciousness for sanity to return to our planet and for humanity to fulfill its destiny. And the arising of space consciousness is the next stage in the evolution of humanity. Foundation and special groups. They want their thoughts to become your thoughts, and usually they succeed. So when watching television, the tendency is for you to fall below thoughts, not rise above it. Television has this in common with alcohol and certain other drugs. So while it proves some relief from your mind, you again pay a high price, loss of consciousness, like those drugs. Too has a strong addictive quality. So you reach for the remote control to switch off and instead find yourself going through all the channels. Half an hour later, you are still watching, still going through the channels, and the off button is the only one your finger seems unable to press. You are still watching, usually not because of anything interest has caught your attention, but precisely because there is nothing of interest to watch. So once you are hooked, the more trivial, the more meaningless it is, the more addictive it becomes. If it were interesting, thought-provoking, it would stimulate your brain into thinking for itself again, which is more conscious and therefore preferable to a TV-induced trance. So your attention would therefore no longer be totally held captive by the image on the screen. So, recognizing the inner space. Space between thoughts is probably already arising sporadically in your life, and you may not even know it. Consciousness mesmerized by experience and conditioned to identify exclusively with form, that is to say, object consciousness, find it at first almost impossible to become aware of space. And this ultimately means that you cannot become aware of yourself because you are always aware of something else. So you are continuously distracted by form, even when you seem to be aware of yourself. You have made yourself into an object, a thought form, and so what you are aware of it is don't know yourself. When you hear of inner space, you may start seeking it, and because you are seeking it as if you were looking for an object for an experience, you cannot find it. And this is the dilemma of all those who are seeking spiritual realizations or enlightenment. And hence Jesus says the kingdom of God is not coming with signs to be observed, nor will they say, lo, here it is, or therefore behold the kingdom of God is in the midst of you. So peace and aliveness that is invisible background without which the experience will not be possible. Whenever there is beauty, kindness, the recognition of the goodness of simple things in your life, look for the background to that experience within yourself, but don't look for it as if you were looking for something. You cannot pin it down and say, now I have it, or grasp it mentally and define it in some way. It is like a cloudless sky. It has no form, it is space and its stillness, the sweetness of being, and infinitely more than these words, which are only pointers. So when you are able to sense it directly within yourself, it deepens. So when you appreciate something simple, like a sound, a sigh, a touch, when you see beauty, when you feel loving kindness toward another, sense of inner spaciousness that is a source of background to that experience. Many poets and sages throughout the ages have observed that true happiness, I call joy of being, is found in simple, seemingly unremarkable things, and most people in their restless search for something significant to happen to them, consciousness misses insignificant, which may not be insignificant at all. So the philosopher Nietzsche, in the rare moment of deep stillness, wrote for happiness, how little suffices for happiness. The least thing precisely, the gentleness things, the lightest things, a lizard rustling, a breath, a wheeze, an eye glance, little make up the best happiness. Be still. So why is it the least thing that makes up the best happiness? Because true happiness is not caused by a thing or event, although this is how it first appears. The thing or event is so subtle, so unobtrusive that it takes up only a small part of your consciousness, and the rest is inner space. Consciousness itself, unobstructed by form, inner space, consciousness and who you are in your essence are one and the same. In other words, the form of little things leaves room for inner space, and it is from inner space, the unconditioned consciousness itself. The true happiness, the joy of being, emanates to be aware of little quiet things. However, you need to be quiet inside. A high degree of alertness is required, and be still, look, listen, and be present. And here's another way of finding inner space: is to become consciousness of being conscious. Say your thing I am and add nothing to it. And be of the stillness that follows that I am, sense your presence, the naked, unveiled, unclothed beingness. It is untouched, by young or old, or rich or poor, good or bad, or any attribute. It is a spacious womb of all creation, all form. Yeah. Okay. So can you hear the mountain streams? A Zen master was walking in silence with one of his disciples along a mountain trail. When they came to an ancient cedar tree, they sat down to eat for a simple meal, first some rice and vegetables. And after the meal, the disciple, a young monk who had not yet found the key to the mystery of Zen, broke the silence by asking the master, "Master, how do I enter Zen?" He was, of course, inquiring how to enter the state of consciousness, which is Zen. The master remained silent. Almost 5 minutes passed, while the disciple anxiously waited for an answer. He was about to ask another question when the master suddenly spoke. "Do you hear the sound of that mountain stream?" The disciple had not been aware of any mountain stream. He had been too busy thinking about the meaning of Zen. Now, as he began to listen for the sound, his noisy mind subsided. At first he heard nothing, then his thinking gave way to heightened alertness, and suddenly he did hear the hardly perceptible murmur of a small stream in the far distance. "Yes, I can hear it now," he said. So the master raised his finger and, with a look in his eye that in some way was both fierce and gentle, said, "Enter Zen from there." The disciple was stunned. It was his first satori, a flash of enlightenment. He knew what Zen was without knowing what it was that he knew. So they continued on their journey in silence, and the disciple was amazed at the aliveness of the world around him. He experienced everything as if for the first time. Okay. So next is all creativity comes out of the inner spaciousness. Once the creation has happened and something has come into form, you have to be vigilant so that the notion of me or mine does not arise. If you take credit for what you accomplish, the ego has returned and their spaciousness has become obscured. So the next title is Perceiving Without Naming. Most people are only peripherally aware of the world that surrounds them, especially if their surroundings are familiar. So the voice in the head absorbs the greater part of their attention. Some people feel more alive when they travel and visit unfamiliar places or foreign countries, because at those times, sense perception experience takes up more of their consciousness than thinking. They become more present. Others remains completely possessed by a voice in the head. Even then, their perception and experience are distorted by instant judgment. They haven't really gone anywhere, only their body is traveling while they remain where they have always been, in their head. And this is the most people reality. As soon as something is perceived, it is named, interpreted, compared with something else, like, dislike, or called good or bad by the phantom self, the ego. They are imprisoned in thoughts, forms, and objects, consciousness. Next. Gradually they will lengthen by themselves without any effort on your part. More importantly than your length is to bring them in infrequently, so that your daily activities on your stream of thinking become interspersed with space. Someone recently showed me the annual prospectus of a large spiritual organization. When I looked through it, I was impressed by the wide choice of interesting seminars and workshops. Reminds me of a smug sport, or one of those Scandinavian buffet where you can take your pick from a huge variety of enticing dishes. The person asked me whether I could recommend one or two courses. I don't know, I said. They all look so interesting. But I do know this, I added, be aware of your breathing as often as you are able. Whenever you remember, do that for 1 year, and it will be more powerfully transformative than attending all of those courses, and it's free. And being aware of your breathing takes attention away from thinking and creates space. It is one way of generating consciousness, although the fullness of consciousness is already there as unmanifested. We are here to bring consciousness into this dimension. So be aware of your breathing. Notice the sensation of the breath. Feel the air moving in and out of your body. Notice how the chest and the abdomen expand and contract slightly with the in and out breath. One conscious breath is enough to make some space where both there was the uninterrupted succession of one thought split another. Next is inner and outer space. So your inner body is not solid but spacious. It is not your physical form, but the life that animates the physical form. So it's just the intelligence that created and sustained the body.
simultaneously coordinating hundreds of different functions of such as the neural complexity that human mind can only understand a tiny fraction of it. So when you become aware of it, what is really happening is that the intelligence is becoming aware of itself. It is the elusive life that no scientist has ever found, because the consciousness that looking for it is it. So physicists have discovered that the apparent solidity of matter is an illusion created by our sense. And this includes the physical body which we perceive and think of as form, but 99% of which is actually empty space. This is how vast space is between the atoms compared to their size, and there is much space gain. Again, within each atom, the physical body is no more than a misperception of who you are. In many ways, it is a microscopic version of our space. To give you an idea of how vast the space is between celestial bodies, consider this light traveling at a constant speed per second, just over 1 second to travel between the Earth and the Moon, light from our nearest neighbor, and da-da-da. So lose yourself to find yourself. Inner space also arises whenever you let go of the need to emphasize your form identity. So the need is of the ego, it is not a true need. We have already touched briefly upon this. Whenever you relinquish one of these behavior patterns, inner space emerge, you become more truly yourself. To the ego, it will seem as if you were losing yourself. But the opposite is the case. And this is already taught that you need to lose yourself to find yourselves. So whenever you let go of one of these patterns, you de-emphasize who you are on the level of form, and who you are beyond form emerges more fully. You become less so you can be more. Next is your purpose is to sit here and talk to me because that's where you are and that's what you are doing. Until you get up and do something else, then that becomes your purpose. So my purpose is to sit in my office for the next 30 years until I retire or get laid off. You are not in your office now, so that's not your purpose. When you do sit in your office and do whatever you do, that is your purpose, not for the next 30 years, but for now. I think there is some misunderstanding here. For you, purpose means what you are doing now. For me, it means having an overall aim in life, something big and significant that gives meaning to what I do, something that makes a difference. And shuffling papers in the office is not it, I know that. So as long as you are unaware of being, you will seek meaning only within the dimension of doing, and on the future, as I say, the dimension of time. And whatever meaning or fulfillment you find, it will dissolve or turn out to have been a deception. Invariably, it will destroy by time. Any meaning we find on that level is true only relatively and temporarily. And for example, if caring for your children gives meaning to your life, what happens to that meaning when they don't need you and perhaps don't even listen to you anymore? So if helping others gives meaning to your life, you depend on others being worse off than yourself, so that your life can continue to be meaningful and you can feel good about yourselves. If the desire to excel, succeed at this or that activities provide you with meaning, what if you never win, or your winning streak comes to an end one day, as it will? So you would then have to look to your imagination and memories, a very unsatisfactory place, to bring some meaning into your life, making it whatever feels only meaningful, as long as there are thousands of millions of others who don't make it. So you need other human beings to feel so that your life can have meaning. So I am not saying here that helping others, caring for your children, or striving for excellence in whatever field are not worthwhile things to do. And for many people, they are an important part of their outer purpose, but outer purpose alone is always relative, unstable, and impermanent. And this does not mean that you should not be engaged in those activities. I mean, you should connect them to your inner primary purpose so that a deeper meaning flows into what you do. Without living in alignment with your primary purpose, this is actually not from my highlights, but I need to read it. Where am I? Without living in alignment with your primary purpose, whatever purpose you come up with, even if it's to create heaven on earth, will be of the ego or become destroyed by time. Sooner or later, it will lead to suffering. So if you ignore your inner purpose, no matter what you do, even if it looks spiritual, ego will creep into how you do it, and so the means will corrupt at the end. The common saying that road to hell is paved with good intentions point to this truth. In other words, not the aims of your actions are primary, but the state of the consciousness out which they come. Fulfilling your primary purpose is laying the foundation for a new reality, a new earth. Once that foundation is there, your excellent purpose become charged with spiritual power, because your aims and intention will be one with the evolutionary impulse of the universe. I'm gonna skip the middle part. What he's trying to say here, when you look upon what you do or where you are as the main purpose of your life, you negate time. This is enormously empowering. The negation of time in what you do also provide the link between your inner and outer purpose, between being and doing. So when you negate time, you negate the ego. Whatever you do, you'll be doing extraordinarily well, because the doing itself becomes a focal point of your attention. Your doing then becomes a channel through which consciousness enters this world. This means there is quality in what you do, even in the most simple action, like turning the pages in the phone book or walking across the room. And the main purpose for turning the pages is to turn the pages, and the secondary purpose is to find a phone number. The main purpose for walking across the room is to walk across the room, and the secondary purpose is to pick up a book at the other end, and the moment you pick up the book, that becomes the main purpose. You may remember the paradox of time we mentioned earlier. Wherever you do takes time, and yet it is always now. So while your inner purpose is to negate time, your outer purpose necessarily involves a future, and so could not exist without time, but it's always secondary. Whenever you become anxious or stressed, outer purpose has taken over, and you lost sight for your inner purpose, and you have forgotten that your state of consciousness is primary and all else is secondary. Would living like this not stop me from looking to achieve something great? My fear is that I will remain stuck with doing little things for the rest of my life, things that are of no consequence. I'm afraid of never rising above mediocrity, never daring to achieve anything great, not fulfilling my potential. The greater rise of small things that are honored and cared for. Everybody's life really consists of small things. Greatness is a mental abstraction and a favorite fantasy of the ego. And the paradox is that the foundation for greatness is honoring in small things of the present moment instead of pursuing the idea of greatness. Okay, next. So, is the notion of success just an egoic illusion? How do we measure true success? And the world will tell you that success is achieving what you set out to do. It will tell you that success is winning, that finding recognition and prosperity are essential ingredients in any success. And all or some of the above are usually byproduct of success, but they are not success. The conventional notion of success is concerned with the outcome of what you do. Some say that success is a result of combination of hard work and luck, or determination and talent, or being in the right place at the right time. While any of this may be determinant of success, they are not in essence. And what the world doesn't tell you, because it doesn't know, is that you cannot become successful. You can only be successful. Don't let the mad world tell you that success is anything other than a successful present moment. And what is that? There is a sense of quality in what you do, even the most simple action. Quality implies care and attention, which come with awareness, and quality requires your presence. Okay, there may be a period of insecurity, so this next highlight, and uncertainty. What should I do? As the ego is no longer running your life, the psychological needs for external security, which is illusory anyway, lessens. So you're able to live with uncertainty, even enjoy it. When you are When you become comfortable with uncertainty, infinite possibility open up in your life. It means fear is no longer a dominant factor in what you do and no longer prevent you from taking action to initiative change. And the Roman philosopher Tacitus rightly observed that the desire for safety stands against every great and noble enterprise. So if uncertainty is unacceptable to you, it turns into fear. It is perfectly acceptable. It turns into increased aliveness, alertness. If it's perfectly acceptable, the uncertainty, it turns into creative aliveness, alertness, and creativity. So many years ago, as a result of a strong inner impulse, I walked out of an academic career that the world would have called promising, stepping into complete uncertainty, and out of that, after several years, emerged my new incarnation as a spiritual teacher. Much later, something similar happened again. The impulse came to give up to my home in England and move to the west coast of North America. I obeyed the impulse, although I didn't know the reason out of it. For it. After that move into uncertainty came the power of now, most of which was written in California. Impressive. So there are two reasons, next highlight, there are two reasons why we don't see this unity, why we see things as separate. One is perception, which reduces reality to what is accessible to us through the small range of our senses, what we can see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, or when we perceive without interpreting or mental labeling, which means that adding thought to our perception, we can actually still sense the deeper connectedness underneath our perception of seemingly separate things. And the other more serious reason for the illusion of separateness is compulsive thinking. It is when we are trapped in incessant streams of compulsive thinking that the universe really disintegrates for us, and we lose the ability to sense the interconnectedness of all that exists. And thinking cuts reality up into lifeless fragments, extremely unintelligent, and destructive action arises out of such a fragmented view of reality. However, there is an even deeper level to the whole, that the interconnectedness of everything is existence. At that deeper level, all things are one. It is the source, the unmanifested one life. It is a timeless intelligence that manifests as a universe unfolding in time. Okay, we have another two. Perfect. So a brief history of your life. The coming into manifestation of the world as well as in returns to the unmanifested. Its expansion and contraction are two universal movements that we could call the outgoing and the return home. And those two movements are reflected throughout the universe in many ways, such as in the incessant expansion and contraction of your heart, as well as its inhalation and exhalation of your breath. So they are also reflected in the cycles of sleep and wakefulness. Each night, without knowing it, you return to unmanifested source of full life when you enter the stage of deep, dreamless sleep, and then we emerge again in the morning, replenish. And those two movements, the outgoing and the return, are also reflected in each person's life cycle. Out of nowhere, so to speak, you suddenly appear in this world. Birth is followed by expansion. There is not only physical growth, but also growth of knowledge, activities, possession, experience, sphere of influence. A span in life becomes increasingly complex, and this is a time when you are mainly concerned with finding or pursuing your outer purpose. And usually there is also corresponding growth of the ego. So what is the loss on the level of form and scale and level of essence? So in the traditional figure of the blind seer, the wounded healer, of ancient cultures and legends, some great loss or disability on the level of form has become an opening into spirit. So when you have had a direct experience of the unstable nature of all forms, you will likely never overvalue form again, and thus lose yourself by blindly pursuing it or attaching yourself to it. The opportunity that the solution of form, in particular old age, represent is only just beginning to be recognized in our contemporary culture. And the majority of people, that opportunity is still tragically missed because the ego identifies with the written movement just as identified with the outward movement. And this results in a hardening of the egoic shell, a contraction rather than an opening. And a diminished ego then spends the rest of its days whining or complaining, trapped in fear or anger, self-pity, guilt, blame, or other negative mental emotional states, or avoidance strategies, such as attachment to memories and thinking and talking about the past. So when the ego is no longer identified with the return movement in a person size, old age and approaching death becomes what it is meant to be, and opening into the realm of spirit. I have met old people who were living embodiment of this process. They have become radiant. Their awakening forms have become transparent to the light of consciousness. On the new earth, old age will be universally recognized and highly valued as a time for the flowering of consciousness. And for those who are still lost in the outer circumstance of their lives, it will be a time of a late homecoming when they awaken of their inner purpose. And for many others, it will represent an intensification and culmination of the awakening process. That's all. Thank you. So I hope you guys enjoy it. So true, I'm reading this. I do agree mostly on the part, but somehow I would like to tell that your life circumstance might be different. So I would say we won't be 100%ly going to be as perfect as a new earth. I think so. I don't know how to say, but that was something that I would like to tell, that whenever you read books, you are allowed to cater whatever you like, you can take, and whatever you cannot take, and it's fine, it's okay, because as the new earth say that I am, so you are who you are, and you don't have to force yourself to be as other person. Yeah. So at first I would say that at first I don't really like Eckhart Tolle. After I read the books, I was a bit skeptical, but after I hate him, I kind of like him because he's very honest. So that's all I could say, and thank you for listening. Bye.